Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's webinar, Why Water Security is Key to Ending Hunger, the second of Ankar's Water and Sanitation webinar series. I am your host, Kitch Bauer, Ankar's Sanitation Project Manager. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface you can see on your screen. At the bottom of your screen, choose your preferred language. We have interpretation available in English and French. If you want interpretation from French to English, select the English language, and if you want interpretation from English to French, select the French language. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the Q&A box. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. And if you have comments, please do type them in the chat box at the bottom left. But remember, the question should be typed in the Q&A box. This webinar is live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so you can also send us your comments through Ankar social media platforms. And now, to set the ball rolling, please permit me to now give you a glimpse of today's event. This has been the housekeeping rules. After this, you will have the opening remarks by Dr. Canisius Kanangiri, the Executive Secretary of Ankar. And then I will come back to introduce the panel. After that, we'll have the keynote address from Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who is the UN Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit and President Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. And after that, we'll have our first presentation, and that will be given by Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, the FAO Assistant Director General, Regional Representative for Africa, and he'll be talking about innovative approaches towards improved access and sustainable use of water for ending hunger and malnutrition. After that, we'll take the second presentation, and that will come from Dr. Claudia Ringler, the Ifpri Deputy Director of Environment and Production Technology Division, and she'll be talking to us on why there is no food and nutrition security without water security. And after that, we'll take the third presentation from Professor Moshood Tijani, the Ankar Groundwater and Climate Change Lead, and he will be talking about APAGROP. APAGROP stands for Ankar Pan-Africa Groundwater Program. Why water security matters, Africa's agenda in the nexus of water, food, energy security. And then we will take questions, answers, and feedback. And then we'll invite the Executive Secretary of Ankar, Dr. Canisius Kanangiri, for the closing remarks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Canisius Kanangiri for the open remarks. The ES, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kitch. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the President of AGRA and Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. Our distinguished panelists, Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa, Dr. Claudia Ringler, Deputy Director of Environment and Production Technology Division at International Food Policy Research Institute, and Professor Moshood Tijani, Ankar Groundwater and Climate Change Lead at Ankar. Distinguished participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the second edition of the Ankar's Water and Sanitation webinar series titled, Why Water Security is Key to Ending Hunger. We deliberately chose this theme to provide an opportunity for us and the general audience to discuss the most pressing challenges in Africa: the water security and food security. In spite of the fact that Africa holds 60% of the world's arable land, the African Development Bank in 2019 reported that Africa imports nearly 50 billion US dollars net of food annually. These numbers are anticipated to increase as climate change, rising population, among other factors, take a toll on Africa over the next decade. Various reports indicate that the net annual food imports by Africa could more than double by the year 2025, with rising the number of people living below the hunger bracket. We all know that water is indispensable for agricultural production. Luckily, Africa has a vast arable land area of about 770 million hectares, out of which more than 40 million hectares are irrigable. However, only 32% of the arable land are cultivated and only 7% are irrigated. From these statistics, there is no doubt that we need a water-secure Africa to bolster our effort to end hunger and to achieve SDG 2, which aims to end hunger and ultimately unlock the development potential of our societies. The African Ministers' Council on Water, Ankar, believes in collective action and multi-sectoral approach to addressing the pressing challenges of water and food security. We are therefore hosting this webinar today to give a platform to experts in the areas of food systems and water management to share their thoughts and to proffer appropriate interventions necessary to re-energize collective actions and responses. With the expert panelists and the contributions of the participants, we hope to increase the understanding of the strategic place of water in food systems, come up with appropriate strategies for water management in agricultural production, and increase understanding of high-level policy and decision makers on improving the necessary access to safe water and food security if we are to accelerate our journey towards sustainable development of Africa. The time to act is now. We must join hands with all the different stakeholders to guarantee the continent's water security, which will in effect contribute to our goal of ending hunger. I look forward to a fruitful discussion with you all, and thank you very much for your understanding. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Executive Secretary, for those opening remarks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor and privilege to introduce our great panel. First and foremost, we have Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the President of AGRA and Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for the 2021 Food Systems Summit. Dr. Kalibata is the President of the Alliance for a Green Revolution, AGRA, where she leads the organization's efforts with partners to ensure a food secure and prosperous Africa through rapid sustainable agricultural growth, working with millions of smallholder farmers in Africa. She's also a UN Secretary General's envoy, special envoy, where she works with the United Nations system and key partners to provide leadership, guidance, and strategic direction towards the 2021 Food Systems Summit. Dr. Kalibata has a distinguished track record in Africa and globally as an agricultural scientist, policymaker, and thought leader. She has held many positions, including serving as Rwanda's Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources from 2008 to 2004. Dr. Kalibata, it is a pleasure to have you on this webinar to present the keynote address. The second on our list of panelists for today's event is Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel, Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Africa at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. Haile Gabriel joined FAO in 2015 as Deputy Regional Representative for Africa and representative to Ghana. He was also the Regional Program Leader for Africa since 2017. He's a long-time champion of the crucial role of agriculture in sustainable development. He has extensive experience in sub-Saharan Africa's development landscape. He has served in many positions, including a stint at the African Union Commission, where he worked as Director of the Semi-Arid Food Grains Research and Development, SAFGRAD, based in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, and also as head of the Rural Economy Division of the African Union Commission. Dr. Abebe, thank you very much for accepting to be part of this panel today. The third panelist for today is Dr. Claudia Ringler, Deputy Director of Environment and Production Technology Division, International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI. Claudia Ringler is a thought leader on water for food and manages IFPRI's natural resource team, co-leads the Institute's water research program, and is a co-manager of Resilience and Competing Users flagship of the Consultative Group for International Research, CGIAR research program on water, land, and ecosystems. Claudia also chairs the Food, Energy, Environment, and Water Network, FE2W. She is associated with the Sustainable Water Futures program of Future Earth and advises several organizations focusing on improving water and food security. Dr. Ringler, it's a pleasure to have you as a panelist in today's webinar. Last but not the least, we have my colleague, Professor Moshood Tijani, the AMCAO Groundwater and Climate Change Lead. Professor Tijani, like me, is a hydrogeologist. In his capacity as AMCAO's Groundwater and Climate Change Lead, he's charged with driving and coordinating the groundwater agenda for sustainable utilization and management of groundwater resources in the African continent. Before joining AMCAO, he was a professor of hydrogeology and environmental geology at the Department of Geology at the prestigious and famous University of Ibadan, Nigeria. He has 22 years of teaching and research experience in groundwater resources evaluation and quality assessment. Professor Tijani has served as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Mining and Geology and the Journal of Engineering, Geology and Environment, which are professional publications of the Nigerian Mining and Geosciences Society and the Nigerian Association for Engineering, Geology and Environment, NAEGE, respectively. Professor Tijani, thank you for joining this panel today. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, please permit me to remind you of the ground rules for today. You have an opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the Q&A box. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. If you have comments, please do type them in the chat box that is on the bottom left, but remember the questions should be typed in the Q&A box. Please be reminded once again that the webinar is live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and you can send in your questions through AMCAO social media platforms. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome Dr. Agnes Kalibata to present the keynote address. Our keynote address will be via video as Dr. Kalibata has competing schedules and is unable to participate in the webinar in person.
Excellencies, honorable ministers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Agnes Kalibata. I am the president of AGRA, an institution that is looking to transform agriculture for smallholder farmers from a solitary struggle to survive to businesses that thrive. It's a great honor to give the opening remarks for this webinar, given the critical situation we are in and the pivotal role you are playing as ministers in driving inclusive growth and sustainability in Africa. The worsening condition of water access in Africa has two major negative impacts on security and development. First, the declining availability of usable water has coincided with an increase in its demand, driven by growing populations and irrigation usage. Among communities and countries that share common water access points, this could result in an increased risk of disputes and conflicts over scarce water resources. Africa currently has 80 transboundary rivers and lake basins, as well as 17 large water catchment areas that exceed 100,000 square kilometers. Given these statistics, it's apparent that regional cooperation and integrated water resource management will be vital to the future. This will be affected by strategies African states will design to deal with the water situation. Second, even though it is largely rain-fed, agriculture remains the main source of income for 80% of the rural population in Africa. This is currently challenged by climate change, and water-induced stress could halve yields and could impact anywhere between 75 to 250 million people by end of year. It's therefore imperative that African nations deal with the question of water for access to food in the face of a changing climate. UNDP predicts that water security will be the largest contributor to food insecurity in the years to come. Our food security is, as a consequence, likely to be extremely fragile. But we must be cautious. Strategies to deal with the water crisis or food security must not have a detrimental effect. They must not be the cause of more conflict, new conflict on our continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while we may be facing a huge challenge with water security on the continent, it's good to know that we have a few blocks to build on. First, we need to revive and implement the Dar es Salaam Plan of Action on water security, which our governments agreed on in July 2016. This requires driving investments to improve water access and access to safe water for all Africans. Second, with the shock caused by COVID, we need to build resilient institutions to oversee, prepare for, and manage shocks like this, but also shocks from drought, and build better resilience and protect farmers and vulnerable populations. Third, and now speaking to you as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit, we need to engage in the food systems dialogues being launched this week globally. These dialogues are coming to each country, and we must engage to understand what's happening in our food systems and what needs to change. Our food system is everything. It's our land, it's our water, it's our people, and it's our planet. But how we produce food is impacting climate change, biodiversity on land and on water. It is threatening our very survival and the survival of our planet. I need you to engage. We need you to engage. We need you to understand Africa's place in the global food system. Please, be sure to understand what is at stake for the water sector, for our countries, for our continent, and for our planet. Engage so that you can be part of defining a better future for our health, for our world, and for our children. I thank you for inviting me.
And we thank you too, Dr. Kalibata, for those wonderful keynote address. And ladies and gentlemen, we have the pleasure of having in this webinar to respond to your questions, Dr. Apollos Nwafo. He's the Vice President of AGRA in charge of policy and state capability. Dr. Apollos, we acknowledge your presence and we're happy to have you here. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to our first presentation, we have a poll for you. It's time to test your understanding and knowledge of the use of water for agriculture on the continent. The first polling question is, what is the percentage of Africa's cultivated area that is irrigated? Question again, what percentage of Africa's cultivated area is irrigated? The first option is 50%, the second option is 20%, and the third option is 70%. Please kindly select the appropriate response and click submit. We'll give you a few minutes to respond, and then we'll close the poll and continue. We're getting ready to close the poll, and for those of you who have not yet responded, please go ahead and submit your responses now so that we can close and give you the final, the correct answer. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now closing the poll, and I will soon share with you the correct answer. So before I share the correct answer, let me quickly go through your responses. Majority of you selected A, majority of you selected C, and next to that is B, and then a few of you selected A. But the correct answer is C. Majority of you got it correct. Please clap for yourselves. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take our first presentation from Dr. Abebe Haile Gabriel of FAO. I'll hand you over to Dr. Haile Gabriel, who will be joining us via live video. Over to you, Dr. Abebe.
Thank you so much. Good morning to you. And I will appreciate if the host can allow me to the live video. I can see that I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it.
Dr. Abebe will give you access, and you'll soon see yourself on live video. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you clearly, Dr. Abebe.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Canisius Kanangire, the Executive Secretary of AMCAO, distinguished fellow panelists and participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my greetings to you all. I would like to congratulate the AMCAO Secretariat for organizing this webinar that links two strategic security concerns, water security and food security. Obviously, sustainable agriculture and food systems depend on sustainable and integrated water management and utilization practices. Increasingly, the crucial significance of food safety and healthy diets as integral part of the food security and nutrition agenda makes the issue of water security in agriculture and food systems much more obvious. Dr. Kalibata mentioned about the demand for water in agriculture and generally increasing in Africa, and that is very true. And according to the poll that has just been concluded, with only about 7% of total cropped area covered under irrigation. Much of agriculture in Africa is rain-fed, which has clearly set a limit on production to only a single crop year. The problem is that even this cannot be guaranteed, since rainfall adequacy and distribution has been erratic and unreliable. And historically, even this 7%, the few irrigation facilities that are available have largely been limited to commercial farms or communal small-scale schemes. Irrigation requires substantial investment. Access to reliable and affordable power and equipment and facilities remain a challenge for the majority of small producers in Africa. Added to this, management complexities of irrigation schemes further complicates the problem. There is also competition among alternative water users. Water is required to meet personal and household needs, for energy and industrial production, and to maintain important water-dependent ecosystems and ecosystem services. Its availability, its access, its reliability, its adequacy, and sustainable use is therefore critical. Let me use a couple of examples from our own field experiences to try and illustrate how innovative approaches could contribute towards improving the availability, access, reliability, and sustainable use of water for agriculture, particularly for smallholder agriculture. The first is from Rwanda, in particular from the Eastern Province, where we had a project aimed at building resilience in the most drought-prone areas through the development of farmer-led, affordable, productive, and sustainable small-scale irrigation technology models, particularly solar-powered irrigation schemes. The second is from Nigeria, in particular northern Nigeria, in an environment of conflict and displacement, where a project aims at rehabilitation of irrigation and farming facilities, working with internally displaced people, host communities, and returnees, and supporting them in dry season activities, especially for vegetable production. I believe these examples can demonstrate that affordable systems and solutions are available and can have positive impact on food security. If we look at the impacts, solar pumps have increasingly become much cheaper and more efficient, making them an attractive option for farmer-led irrigation. They have led to significant increase in productivity compared to rain-fed agriculture and proved farming to be more attractive option for the youth. In Rwanda, for example, it led farmers to diversify their production into livestock, crops, and high-value vegetables and fruits. It also led to improved access rights to resources by women. In Nigeria, FAO supported around 100,000 smallholders, including women and youth, with a distribution of water pumps and accessories for farm irrigation. Beneficiaries recorded an increase in yield from 181 ton to 200 ton per hectare for tomatoes and pepper. There was also increase in the size of plot cultivated from average of 1 hectare to 2 hectares. Some of the lessons that have been learned include, for example, that solar-powered irrigation systems are more reliable and energy efficient. As renewable source of energy, they contribute to climate solutions. Small-scale solar irrigation schemes could be more affordable to many farmers. However, still they could be expensive for several small farmers. Innovations, particularly digital agriculture, could make them more affordable, since the cost could be spread with mobile phone-based pay-as-you-pump systems. Active engagement and demonstration of ownership by users, farmers, herders, and so on, will be necessary to allow for flexible farmer-led water management practices. And access to equipment, facilities, and knowledge received by farmers have improved food security and increased rural incomes in the target communities, as we say, where water flows, food grows. Trained farmers can transfer the knowledge acquired to other fellow farmers. However, there could be a potential risk of overexploitation of water resources from too many unregulated small pumps. What can be scaled up? First, on technical issues. There is a scope for scaling up small-scale solar-powered irrigation systems. They can work better when coupled with water-efficient irrigation techniques, as well as drilling of more tube wells and wash boreholes. It requires investment in capacity building of the actors and stakeholders. Second, on institutional issues. Innovative systems should be designed to adapt to specific country and local contexts. They should be integrated with agri-food systems along the whole value chain, from inputs such as improved seeds, access to markets, and so on, as a package. Third, on policy and governance issues, the agenda water, and I think this is very important, in particular for AMCA. The agenda of water security does not belong only to the ministries of water. It's also an agenda for agriculture, for energy. I spoke about solar powered irrigation schemes. So energy ministries is very key. Transport, health, finance, and so on. Water is a cross-sectoral agenda, and multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders engagement and collaboration will be absolutely necessary and required at all levels. And obviously, as I said, AMCA could do a lot in this regard. Resource governance issues are central to ensure sustainable water security, to contribute to food security and nutrition in the context of the broader agriculture and food systems transformation. Strong advocacy and capacity strengthening would be required. FAO has been developing and rolling out guidelines and principles to support member countries in sustainable and equitable management of natural resources, including on water governance, sustainable water management, water scarcity in agriculture, water platform and agroecology, to mention just a few. Advances in digital agriculture and innovation has facilitated evidence-based decision-making, as well as improved risk management. For example, over the years, FAO has developed various tools that can support improved management and governance of natural resources, including water and land. Some of these include Aquastat, the database and software to monitor and manage water worldwide, the AquaCrop, a model developed to stimulate the yield response of crops to water, particularly well suited to conditions in which water is a key limiting factor in crop production. CropWatt for Windows, a software program to calculate crop water requirements and irrigation requirements based on soil, climate, and crop data. ClimWatt, a climatic database to be used in combination with the computer program CropWatt, and allows the calculation of crop water requirements, irrigation supply, and irrigation scheduling for various crops for a range of climatological stations worldwide. The reason why I am mentioning these tools that are available at FAO is to emphasize the point that technical solutions are available. I think we need to work very closely. We need to collaborate with all stakeholders at local, national, sub-regional, regional level, and global level to make sure that the solutions that are available are applied to address practical problems, practical issues faced by smallholder producers in Africa, in particular to improve the access, affordability, availability of water for food security. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe, for sharing with us from your wealth of experience. My key takeaway is where water flows, food grows. Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our second poll as we prepare for the next presentation. Our second poll question is, what is the percentage public agricultural water investments that support rain-fed agriculture in Africa? What is the percentage public agricultural water investments that support rain-fed agriculture in Africa? Option A is 25%, option B is 10%, option C is 5%. You can select the approach and we will share final results at the end of the poll. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have not yet responded, please go ahead and submit your and now find the correct answer. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears that majority of you chose option B, which is 10%. A few of you selected option 5, which is option C, which is 5%, and far lesser selected option A, which is 25%. But the correct answer is 5%. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. And now we move to our second presentation for the day. Our second presentation is from Dr. Claudia Ringler of Ifpri. Over to you, Dr. Ringler, for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction. As we already heard so eloquently from the previous speakers, there is no nutrition security without water security. Next slide, please. The world has common goals for both water and food and nutrition security, and these are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goal 2 on zero hunger and Goal 6 on water and sanitation. But neither of them is on track. And this is due, among others, because the communities do not work together. Next slide. Currently, every third person on the globe is malnourished in one form or another. This includes 822 million people who are undernourished, with recent increases due to conflict and climate change, and now COVID-19. At the same time, 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, such as lack of vitamin A or iron, leading to poor physical and mental development. And a further 2 billion people are overweight or obese, also with an increasing tendency. Trends suggest that every second person will be affected by malnutrition in the future. Next slide, please. At the same time, SDG 6 on water and sanitation is also not on track. Every third person today lives in a water-stressed environment. 1/3 of global grain production and more than 20% of economic activity takes place in water-stressed areas, and many of these are in Africa. As the graphs on the right show, water shortages and scarcity are dramatically growing, by 2050, affecting half of the global population, with most rapid growth in low-income countries, including much of Africa. Next slide, please. This figure shows key linkages between water and food security and nutrition, and specifically how water availability, access, use, and stability over time are linked to food security and nutrition availability, access, use, and stability over time. Water is itself a food with important micronutrients such as fluoride, calcium, and magnesium, and sufficient quality and availability of water are paramount for drinking, cooking, and personal hygiene. Second, agriculture, as we've already heard, is by far the largest user of freshwater withdrawals at an estimated 70%, almost entirely used for irrigation. But water, as you can see in the graph, is also necessary for food processing and preparation. And finally, and very importantly, as Agnes has also alluded to, water is integral to the function and productivity of our ecosystems that are the source of our food systems. Without viable ecosystems, the basis of our food systems would simply disappear. Next slide, please. When we specifically focus on irrigation, which is an area with very rapid growth in Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa, we can see 4 positive pathways linking irrigation to improved nutrition. The production pathway, the first on the top, describes that irrigators produce during the dry season when nutritional problems are largest. The income pathway describes that irrigators tend to generate income from the crops or fodder they irrigate. This income can be used to pay for health costs and school fees and to purchase more diverse foods, such as eggs or nuts. Third, irrigation can improve the water supply, sanitation, hygiene, or wash environment near the household, ideally when designed as multiple use systems. In Ethiopia, we found that small-scale irrigators who used groundwater for irrigation also had the shortest time to collect water directly from the irrigation wells. Rain-fed households, on the other hand, were more likely to have insufficient water for domestic purposes. However, those households who used a surface source for both irrigation and domestic use had the worst wash outcomes. Thus, the source and quality of the irrigation water matters. A final positive pathway from irrigation to improved nutrition is via women's empowerment, but I'll cover this a bit later. In addition to these positive pathways, there are also 2 potentially negative pathways from irrigation to nutrition, and that is if appropriate hazard mitigation measures are not undertaken. One pathway here focuses on waterborne diseases such as malaria or schistosomiasis. And the second negative pathway is clearly water pollution, for example, from pesticides or excessive fertilizer applications. Next slide, please. Given the strong interlinkages between water and nutrition, the United Nations System Standing Committee on Nutrition earlier this year published a paper that recommends a series of actions to improve both water and nutrition security. Next slide, please. The paper builds on the opportunity of 2 ongoing United Nations decades, specifically the United Nations Decade of Action on Nutrition and the United Nations Water Action Decade. A quick review of the 2 decades for action suggests that the Nutrition Decade mentions water, which is good, but they stop at wash. Irrigation is not mentioned. Sustainable consumption is mentioned, but not defined. Similarly, the Water Action Decade doesn't say much about the role of agricultural water, doesn't stress the contribution of water to zero hunger, and could do a better job on the special role of water needs of women. Next slide. The first action recommended in the UNSCN paper is to implement nutrition-sensitive agricultural water management to strengthen the 4 positive linkages from irrigation to nutrition that I explained, and also to reduce potential hazards. This requires involving the nutrition health communities, as we've also heard from Dr. Abebe, and also women and men in the design of irrigation systems and the addition of behavior change communication on nutrition as part of capacity building on irrigation. Next slide, please. To operationalize this, the World Bank has published last year a guidance with indicators that can be monitored for nutrition-sensitive water resource management and irrigation. This slide shows selected indicators for one of the pathways, the production pathway. As an example, when investing in a new irrigation system, rather than collecting only data on yield increase, A nutrition-sensitive project would collect data on the diversity of crops produced, on the number of food insecure people living in the irrigated area, and if additional kitchen gardens were established by the project. Next slide. The second pathway and the second recommendation focuses on the nutrition community directly. We don't only need good diets to become more affordable, but they also need to become more sustainable. This includes considering the water footprint, but also the entire environmental footprint of our diets and everything else we grow with water, including our clothes and sugary drinks. This can be done through including environmental considerations in our national food-based dietary guidelines. And we can, of course, do more to avoid food waste and losses that consume water and reduce nutrition. Next slide, please. Water footprints clearly vary by diet. Next slide, please. This graph shows, I hope you all see it, yes, shows calories per cubic meter of water for a low, middle, and high income diet in Ethiopia, calculated based on local water use and food intake data. Clearly, as societies prosper, the water footprint of diets will increase, and diets vary dramatically everywhere, including among individuals in every African country. Considering how we can improve equity and sustainability in diets can get us much closer to water and nutrition security. Next slide, please. The third recommendation from the paper is to explicitly address social inequities. This includes supporting the multiple water needs of women. Millions of African women and girls continue to walk for more than 30 minutes every day to collect water for domestic use. When irrigation is developed, few women participate in water use associations, and women cannot often own or use modern irrigation technologies such as the solar pumps that Dr. Abebe mentioned, due to local norms, or because they don't own land rights. They are more likely to continue to use buckets and watering cans, as you've seen on the very first slide of this event. Irrigation in multiple use systems, however, can be an opportunity for women's empowerment and from there to nutrition, but only if policymakers and investors are serious about making this happen. Next slide, please. This slide shows why women are the key mediators across water and nutrition. Women are principally responsible for good diets and for a clean household environment and the absence of disease. These tasks can only be done if they have appropriate access to water. If they take many hours to clean the household environment and to get good food on the table, they will not have time to take care of children, which is an important underlying contribution to good nutrition. So it's very important to understand and to support and to strengthen women's roles for improved nutrition and specifically on removing water constraints they face. Next slide, please. It's impossible to give a talk on water nutrition without mentioning COVID-19, the big crisis we are all in right now. Next slide. Why is that? It's because COVID-19 worsens food and nutrition outcomes, and poor access to water makes coping with COVID-19 more challenging. A recent phone survey supported by USAID to assess COVID-19 impacts in northern Ghana shows that almost 3/4 of women worried about food availability. 3/4 did reduce the diversity of foods they consumed, and more than 1/3 did not meet some very basic dietary diversity score. The same women, among these same women, close to 60% reported that they did not always wash their hands when they should, such as after handling dirty diapers. Some never do and never did because no water was available at the household. So it's unclear how you can improve nutrition this way. Next slide. COVID-19 basically heightens the need for synergistic action on water and food security. Access to hand washing facilities is essential to address COVID-19. The traumatic income shocks that we are seeing are reducing access to food and in particular nutritious food as well as water. Understanding the specific challenges are crucial, and investing in water for all uses is essential. Finally, women's time burden is challenged yet further through mobility constraints, increased caring responsibilities, and lower incomes. There's thus an even stronger need to jointly consider water and nutrition security strategies. Final slide. To conclude, among this growing water and climate crisis, water actions need to be centered even more on achieving synergistic outcomes. Focus on both water and food and nutrition and environmental sustainability and security. At the same time, All sectors depending on water, agriculture, food, nutrition, wash, energy, all of them need to use water more sustainably. No one should be served first. All need to equitably get access. Finally, women are the key connector between water and food security and nutrition, and their agency in these areas need to be supported by both the water and nutrition communities. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much to Dr. Claudia Ringler for that very, very, very informative presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, as she said, we need to reduce women's time burden to secure both water and nutrition, especially in Africa. And ladies and gentlemen, having taken that presentation, please allow me to share with you the third and last polling question for today. The question for today is, what share of Africa's irrigated area is irrigated with groundwater? What share of Africa's irrigated area is done using groundwater? Option A is 1%, about 1%. Option B is about 13%. And option C, the final one, is about 50%. Please select the appropriate response and click submit. We will soon close the poll. For those of you who have not yet responded, please go ahead and submit your responses now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now closing the poll, and I will soon be sharing with you the correct answer. It looks like the majority of you selected option A, which is about 1%. And ladies and gentlemen, the correct answer is 13%, option B, and 36% of our respondents chose this. Thank you very much for participating in this poll. And our third and last presentation is from Professor Moshood Tijani of Ankar. Professor Tijani, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Kitch. Thank you, yes, thank you, colleagues. The presentation for today is to showcase why water security matters. And we want to showcase this by using the upper group program to showcase what AMCO is doing in response to this. As a preamble, I mean, in a recent interview, somebody asked me that what are the 3 things that the world can do without? That the world can't do without. And the question, my response is that the world cannot do without, first of all, water. Second, mostly because instead of mentioning air, we could have mentioned the third one as the God-given air. But with the consciousness that without clean energy as the third option, we can end up in polluting our environment and the totality of environment, and including the air. So therefore, renewable energy, clean energy, alongside with water and food, is what the world cannot do without. In this light, the above answer is a justification of the topic of today, which is about why water matters in this food, water, and energy nexus. In addition, the justification is to the fact that 6 out of the 17 SDG goals are related to satisfying water. If we are able to attain the water security, definitely 6 other key SDG will be achieved. Now, in terms of doing that, water security can be looked at from the perspective of providing water security. And water security in this sense is about safeguarding the access to water in terms of quantity and in terms of the safe yield that we need to sustain life. In that case, we realize that sustaining the ecosystem is one of the key concepts of the water security. We need water to sustain the ecosystem. We need water to sustain food security, and we need water to sustain energy security. And in terms of the challenges of Africa relating to food security and energy security, we realize the fact that, number one, we need to have a connection between the food security and the water security. And the connection is the fact that without, without water security, there's no way we can have food security. And we know that the challenges in Africa is because of population increase, climate change. These are the challenges that compound the problem of water security in Africa. And by the time we are going to address that, we have to look at the synergy between having good governance in terms of groundwater security. We have to have transboundary aquifer cooperation. We have to have finance and investment in water infrastructures. And of course, this will lead to ensuring peace and stability within the community of water users. And with that, we'll be able to achieve water security in Africa. Now, looking at the linkage, you realize that with the map that we are seeing on our screen, with the map, there is a linkage between hunger index and food security index in Africa. And that is clearly shown from the diagram that we are having, which shows that there is a link between the water security, energy index, energy, water, and food security index. So therefore, it is easy for us to look at the fact that without our water security, there's no way we can get food security. But now, if we look at it, why then is the hunger and food security are linked together? The critical question is why water security matters. And it matters because we have 3 critical things to look at here. Water solves the problem of water resilience because we have, I think I need to share my slide. Livelihood, number one, is where water will contribute to. Water is essential to secure necessary livelihood, agriculture, energy production. And that will link to also helping us to sustain our ecosystem. Healthy living is also going to lead to healthy. It's going to also lead to have all these 5 items based on acceptable water quality, adequate water quantity, accessible source, which are the sources of the water available. We'll be able to maintain livelihood, ecosystem, healthy living. Healthy living will lead to productive economy, and productive economy definitely will be able to prepare for disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. Now, what is the contribution of APA Group? In its mandate to support, to develop and manage and utilize water and energy security in Africa, AMCO identified groundwater as one of the priority intervention area in its strategic plan. And identifying groundwater is key because of the contribution of groundwater in a lot of ways to the water security in Africa. Next slide. Groundwater in Africa. And by doing that, why is it water, groundwater? Why groundwater? Why is it AMCO is focusing on groundwater? It's because we have more than 20 times of groundwater compared to our freshwater store in rivers and lakes. That means the potential is there. The large volume is there to tap. Apart from that, 320 million people in Africa lack access to safe water supply. So groundwater is key to resilience in terms of climate change impact. So we realize that groundwater, developing groundwater sustainably can help us to ensure water security, can help us to ensure food security because it supports smallholders, farmers. It can also help us to ensure safe water quality because groundwater is relatively protected from contamination and is of good quality in most cases. Then it is also going to help us to solve the resilience in terms of climate change. Next slide. So on this frame, the aim of the APA Group program of the AMCO is to promote sustainable management and utilization of groundwater resources, to promote appropriate technology and practice in groundwater development and management in Africa, and to also improve the policy and practice of groundwater in Africa for better lives and livelihood. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in this regard, the strategy of APA Group is based on 3 fundamental pillars. And those fundamental pillars will help us to address the key thematic area to develop and manage African groundwater resources sustainably. Number 1, we are going to look at the policy and governance issue. How do we strengthen the policy and governance related to groundwater? Country support tool, management tool to support groundwater resources management, capacity strengthening, very, very critical. We need to develop our capacity in groundwater development. We want to create the knowledge. The knowledge about groundwater is very important. We therefore want to create a knowledge hub where information about groundwater can be made available to member states. Of course, we need to assess the groundwater resources to be able to appropriately manage. Because if you don't know what we have, how will you manage? Then most importantly also, we need to attract public and private investment in groundwater sector. Now, going forward, next slide, please. Going forward from this point, we realize that we need to sustainably need collaboration, recommendation in terms of policy. There is need for secured water rights as a policy recommendation. Secure water rights to include the fact that even both formal and informal sector and gender equity into access to water. Because as one of the panelists said, women are key. And if there is no access and right in terms of access to water, there could be a challenge. Then encouraging the best practices in water use and conservation method is important. And we can do that by also create incentive for efficient water use. Of course, as I said, there is need for investment in water infrastructure, irrigation, agricultural research and development, and other infrastructure, including rural roads, to move agricultural products. Of course, public and private partnership is needed, and the stakeholders' involvement. All the stakeholders, as one of the participants at the panelists also said, not only Ministry of Water Resources, relevant other ministries need to be involved in making sure that we have water security that will lead to food security. Next slide. So, as I said, capacity building is needed, institutional policy framework is needed, infrastructural finance is needed. And these are areas that we need to really look at in terms of ensuring sustainable management of our groundwater resources that we can deploy in meeting water security, which can assist in also food security. And last slide, please. As a concluding thought, I want us to look at our earth as a storage. Look at it from that way, we have to look at the fact that increasing consumption, population growth, our demand for water, for food, for energy, and even for the maintenance of our environment is increasing. This is leading to acute water scarcity due to avoid the environmental catastrophe of protecting our planet. We need to ensure sustainable management of water resources, and ensuring that management of our water resources, including groundwater that is going to contribute in the face of climate change, means we are going to increase food security and we'll be able to protect our planet and fight hunger. Thanks so much for your attention.
And thank you to Professor Tijani for your presentation. And the major highlights of that, Ankar is working through Upper Group to improve finance, strengthen institutions, and build capacity for harnessing groundwater to improve water supply so that we can improve food security. Thank you very much once again. And on that note, I use this opportunity to thank Dr. Kalibata, Dr. Abebe, Dr. Ringler, and of course you again, Professor Tijani. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentations. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the Q&A box. Do remember to also send in your comments through the chat box. And ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you that we have Dr. Apollos Nwafo, who is the Vice President of Policy and State Capability of AGRA, who will be taking questions that are sent to Dr. Agnes Kalibata. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our first question for the day. And this question goes to Dr. Agnes Kalibata and by default, Dr. Apollos Nwafo. So it's from Ignab Padaki. He said, towards the end of the presentation of Dr. Kalibata, she said, the issue of water is not important for food production, but it's not only important for food production, but it is a question of life. That he wants more explanation on this sentence made by Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Dr. Apollos Nwafo, please can you respond to this? It appears Dr. Apollos is still working to try to connect to respond to the question. So we'll go to the next question, but we will certainly come back to the question posed to Dr. Apollos. And the second question is from Andrew Bullock. He said, many African nations have identified the vitality of agricultural development to national economies in their national development strategies and to local economic transformation that bottom line is agriculture is the best route out of poverty. Water is one, but not the only challenge in unlocking potential. Is asking, can AMCAO help build a partnership with Ifpri as they have vital lessons from their past program evaluations? I think this is more like a suggestion and a comment than a question, and I will allow the Executive Secretary of AMCAO to subsequently respond to this later. But I think this sounds like a very good suggestion. The third question for today is that how are parties outside Africa conducting their commerce for Africa agricultural products that can be very significant to Africa's opportunities, especially among the poor with less influence? I would like to, this question was just sent, and then I think I can throw this question to Dr. Abebe. He's asked this question, they are asking how parties outside Africa conduct their commerce for African agricultural. Go ahead, Dr. Abebe, you can respond to the questions.
Excuse me, there was some kind of interruption. Can you please repeat the question?
For African agricultural products can be very significant to Africa's opportunities, especially among the poor. He said, can AMCAO, AGRA, and FAO help bring other non-African countries into the dialogue?
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. I thought AMCAO was going to comment first because it is one of the, I understand, the subcommittees, the African Union Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Water, Environment, and Rural Development. And it is absolutely appropriate that they take leadership on that. I know they have been doing this. We have always been, as FAO, now I'm speaking about FAO, we have been accompanying our member states and their regional organizations, such as the Regional Economic Communities, as well as the African Union Commission. Earlier on, I mentioned about a gap, and that gap is looking at how the water as an intersectoral priority agenda is being handled at the country level, because at the end of the day, it is countries who would design and implement programs, be it on irrigation or on anything else. I repeat the same thing for agriculture. Now, I don't know how many people from whenever AMCAO holds its meeting. I know it is the ministers of water who meet. I don't know how many ministers in charge of energy, for example, join their meeting, or ministers from finance join their meeting, because the issue of water is not just about water. You know, it is about all the interrelated factors that make or break interventions. I can give you an example of how we collaborate. FAO collaborates with the African Union and other partners, including the World Bank, the African Development Bank, Ifpri, World Food Program, the European Community, and we've been working with the African Union in the context of COVID-19 to really put the issue of food security and rural livelihoods on top of the agenda. At the beginning of the pandemic, you remember, the focus was entirely, exclusively focused on the health issues, the public health issues, which is appropriate. Yes, COVID-19 is a public health issue, and therefore it must be addressed as such. But then, what did the countries do? The countries, they went on lockdown measures. They introduced series of lockdown measures, restricted movements of not just people, but also goods and services, including food. So FAO alerted the African Union to make sure that this is treated as essential activity, as a priority. And so we quickly convened together with the African Union Ministers of Agriculture, first in April, and subsequently in July, a joint ministerial conference of agriculture, of trade, and of finance. The idea is to bring together these key ministries to discuss about one particular issue. So in short, what I want to say is the issue of water in this particular case is so strategic, so crucial. It cannot be left to any one sector ministry. And we can, together with AMCAO and other relevant and interested partners, we can support platforms that can facilitate and bring together the relevant actors and stakeholders around the table to discuss this issue. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe, for your response. I would like to ask the Executive Secretary of AMCAO to weigh in on those on that point that you made your responses on before we continue. And I have a couple of questions. I would like Dr. Abebe to stand by immediately after the ES. I have another question for you. Over to you, ES.
I think if I will just emphasize what Dr. Bebe has just said. I think water is so indispensable for most of activities of human development and our continent's development, that it cannot be left only to one ministry or one sector. I think it is something that we need to look into between those who manage the water resources, but also those who use this water for different productive uses, like agriculture, like industries, etc., including even those who also need to preserve our ecosystems, which are part of our capital, natural capital, that we need absolutely to preserve and conserve for future generations. So this is the whole essence of the integrated water resources management, which was actually proposing to bring all the stakeholders together to discuss the availability of water and how it can be used for the benefit of all the sectors, which are normally seen as competing sectors, but rather to bring them to creating a number of synergies and develop sustainable management of that resources. And today we are talking of nexus, like water, our colleague Tijani has just presented, but again, in the context of nexus, you cannot plan for the nexus activities, approaches alone in your sector. So I think, as Dr. Abebe said, water requires that we look at it in a more holistic way, taking into account all the different users, and everyone brings his or her contribution on the table. And these contributions can be very technical, like what FAO is developing, all those tools. It can be research findings, like what Ifpri is doing. It can be sound policies and strategy and strategic directions, like what AMCAO is doing, but also every one of us has a role to play in making sure that up to down on the small whole farmer, those technologies, those policies, and those different strategies are understood and used for the benefit of our different communities to increase production, to increase productivity also, and also make sure that we sustain that level of servicing the food and nutrition area, which at the end of the day contributes at the overall peace and security of our continent.
Thank you very much, ES, for your intervention. And now I will revert back to Dr. Apollos Nwafo of AGRA with the question that has been posed to Agnes Kalibata. The question is, the issue of water, that Agnes Kalibata said the issue of water is not important only for food production, but it is a question of life. And Ignab Padake wants more explanation on this. Over to you, Dr. Nwafo.
Thank you so much, Keech. Apologies that I had an issue with the internet here, so I was not able to get the question. I want to say, first of all, thank you for organizing this webinar, and on behalf of Dr. Kalibata, we are very, very much looking forward to how we can strengthen these partnerships in a way that ensures that we have a sustainable pathway to working together and achieving inclusive agricultural transformation and food security for all in Africa. I think for us, water is life because, of course, from the simple things that we know how important water is if our food is going to grow, and if we're going to achieve nutrition for all across the continent, then that's important. If you remember, the statistics are showing that over 130 million children within the continent, are going to be nutrition deficient by the time we get to the end of this year because of COVID. And this is a spike, given the level of food insecurity across the continent. So, and we know the role water plays in ensuring nutrition for our children, but also in improving yields and for ensuring effective management of strategic food reserves in our country. And that's really important. So when we're looking at access to water for all, we're looking at it not just from a food security perspective, we're also looking at it from a nutrition lens, as well as the fact that safe water is important if Africa is going to be able to achieve its economic recovery and development programs. And it's because of the role water plays, the nexus between water and food security, water and nutrition, water and livelihoods, as well as water and security. It's a national security issue. I mean, look at the levels of conflict as a result of water, right from Sudan to the other countries that we're seeing. And we believe that it's important that we address this if we're going to ensure that we're keeping ourselves alive as Africa and ensuring that we're going to achieve food security for all by 2030.
Thank you very much, Dr. Apollos Nwafo of AGRA. And of course, like you said, AMCAR looks forward to strengthening partnerships with AGRA, but also with IFPRI, as there has been called, and also with FAO. And because, as Dr. Abebe said, where water flows, food grows. And talking about Dr. Abebe, I have a quick question for Dr. Abebe. He said that the question is from Abebe, from Henk Holzlek. He said, you rightly mentioned the need for capacity building. He said organizations like Rural Water Supply Network, IMWI, IMWI, the Smart Center Group have knowledge on innovative water technologies and approaches that can reduce the cost of rain, water harvesting, wells, pumps by 50% or more as compared to conventional technology. And he's asking, who do you think should fund the building of local capacity in design, production, and other things that involve innovation? Dr. Abebe, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's a very valid, very interesting question. It's a problem, I know. Now, before talking about who should be providing the necessary funds to support those capacity building interventions, I think the starting point is to have that appreciation among all the actors and stakeholders that it is a priority issue. It's a priority activity. And I'm very happy that you linked it with local level. So we're not talking about things in a vacuum. It's about strengthening local capacities. So is it a priority? And whose priority is it? That's why I keep emphasizing on ownership. Ownership at the national level. How are governments in the countries in Africa prioritizing the issue of water security and linked with food security? How are they prioritizing it? You may find for example, food security as a priority agenda in many countries in the policy documents. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real priorities. And real priorities are measured by the amount of investment that go into those priorities. First and foremost, from national budgets. The problem in Africa is we design something, we say this is our priority, and then start looking for funds from elsewhere. If we continue to do that, we're not going to achieve anything. If we say it is a priority, if there is an agreement at all levels, and I want to address this to the policy level, the ministers and government, then they should demonstrate ownership by allocating some adequate amount of resources, and then try to look for external resources to fill in the gap. Let me give you examples from the agriculture sector. In 2003, the heads of state met in Maputo, Mozambique, adopted a framework to guide agricultural development in Africa called Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, and agreed that this would be owned by Africa and nationally and regionally owned. And as a demonstration of this ownership, they agreed to allocate at least 10% of their national budget to agriculture. I'm talking about 2003, and now we are in 2020, 17 years ago. Where are we? How many of the countries in Africa are allocating 10% of their national budget to agriculture? In a broader, agriculture is broader. I'm talking about crops, livestock, fisheries, forestry, and so on. So let's go and look at the facts of how much our governments are allocating from their natural resources on water security for food security. This is a question. If we are really serious about sustainability, we cannot delink the prioritization from the funding. We can't have priorities at national level and funding at external to it. I'm not saying external funding is not going to be required. Strengthening of capacities is absolutely critical. The technical solutions are there, but without really the supporting capacity strengthening, it's not going to happen. So if it is a priority, then I think countries first and foremost should look for resources internally and then look for partnerships. There are so many opportunities for partnerships. I'm not downplaying this. What I'm saying is, let's not start from asking the question, who is going to fund it? Government should be able to fund it in the short, medium term. And in the long term, there should be, we talked about technologies getting cheaper and cheaper, innovative solutions, digitalization is making the cost of investment lower over time. So they should be in a position to pay for themselves, those investments. So in the medium to long term, those users should be able to also contribute to the capacity strengthening aspect. Sorry, I took longer. I'm a little bit passionate about this. I hope you will understand me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. And your passion is very infectious. We share your passion. Government should allocate more money for water security towards ensuring food security. We hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much. And now we have a question here for Dr. Claudia Ringler. And the question is from Sefu Kebede Gumesa. He said, which path should Africa follow in securing food? Large-scale commercial farming versus smallholders agriculture, or both? Over to you, Dr. Claudia Ringler.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. And the answer is both. As we've heard, there are many different geographies in Africa. There are also many different reasons of why countries pursue agriculture and especially irrigated agriculture. We've already heard of these, the large irrigated areas. They generally exist because countries want to generate foreign exchange. That could be some sugarcane plantations, or I don't know, sometimes cocoa or coffee. Also, most coffee in Africa is currently not irrigated. But anyway, so there are large irrigated farms where countries want to generate foreign exchange. But there are obviously, and the other large irrigated areas are for basic food security staples or food security crops, and their rice, of course, dominates. So those are not necessarily always profitable, but they have a place because they fulfill an important need that countries have identified. But at the end of the day, these large areas, are very interspersed. So you don't see a lot of these large-scale systems, among others, because there has been serious underinvestment by African governments, as Dr. Abebe has so well described. At the same time, we have seen a much faster increase in those very small irrigated farms. So where farmers themselves purchase equipment, dig a well, use either buckets or watering cans, and hopefully increasingly motor pumps and especially solar pumps. So those very small self-supplied irrigated areas are growing more rapidly, can be located, in areas further away from large river systems or dams. And those have a very important role to play. They are generally more profitable, especially compared to larger rice systems. They are very important not only for income, but also for food security and nutrition. So both types of areas have a role to play. It's important to understand why someone invests in irrigation. It's important that governments provide a suitable framework for both types of systems to exist, and that governments work, as we've already heard, hand in hand across ministries and across agencies to ensure that the purpose that has been identified for irrigation development is really fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claudia, for your response to that. And we have a question for Professor Moshood Tijani. And the question is, what are the strategies of APAGROP in relation with African countries to secure the groundwater, which nowadays suffers from pollution in various forms? Professor Tijani, over to you to respond to this question.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. We thank the questionnaire. I think the APAGROP and the groundwater program in AMCO had different thematic areas. And one of the thematic areas that we are working on is to look at the quality, especially groundwater quality in our urban areas. We have one of our action group that are working on this, like a think tank group, working to develop some program on this, on looking at what are the situation in terms of the groundwater contamination, especially in our urban areas. Of course, we know in the rural areas, some agricultural area, the agricultural water problem is there. So AMCO, in one of its priority area, is to look at these areas and being able to bring the governance system to see the challenges and how to prevent such. It requires a lot of effort from different angles, because if you look at it, most of these pollutions are arising from the fact that we don't have central sewage system in most of our African cities. If there are central sewage system, there won't be in-house septic tanks and so on that are causing some fecal pollution in some cases. Not to talk of the urban stormwater drainage system that are that are filled with solid waste, which are also ending up in our drainage system, and the drainage system is connected with the groundwater system. So we have both surface and groundwater interaction, which also lead to pollution. Industrial pollution is also there, coming down in some areas, acid rain. So we have different dimensions to water quality issues. And AMCO, based on its advocacy and the network with the member state, we have a program of action in this line to look at this and be able to call the attention of the governance system in our member state to the fact that actions need to be developed in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that very straight to the point response. And now we will take again the question from Andrew Bullock, which is directed towards the Executive Secretary of AMCA. He said, many African nations have identified the vitality of agricultural development to national economies in their national development strategies and to local economic transformation. And that the bottom line is that agriculture is the best route out of poverty. Water is one, but not the only challenge in unlocking potential. I completely agree with you. And then he's asking, can AMCA help build a partnership with IFAD as they have vital lessons from their past program evaluations? The ES of AMCA, over to you to respond to the comments and questions from Andrew Bullock.
Thank you very much, Kitch and Andy Bullock. I think this is a very important question. And indeed, the agricultural sector in Africa has more bottlenecks, not only water. Water is one and one key factor which can very much unlock the potential of African agriculture if well addressed, but we have many others. We have many others, and Dr. Abebe talked about seeds, for example, talked about other areas and other technologies which could increase productivity and therefore increase production and income of people and reduce in a significant way the poverty. And you can talk of many of those, including some aspects of biotechnology, fertilizers, even the way you prepare your land, mechanization, all those need to be taken on board. Indeed, as we look at how water can be used for development of our continent, we need to take lessons from different partners, including, of course, IFAD, with the many production of knowledge that they have gathered. FAO has many tools, as our presenter said. African Agricultural Technology Foundation has many in the area of biotechnology and mechanization and production of seeds which are adapted to different contexts, including scarcity of water. I think all those are partnerships that we need to bring on board so that we can be able to provide knowledge to our stakeholders. And I think with the development of the knowledge hub at AMCA, we can gather all those knowledge. And then with the series of webinars that we have already initiated, we can continue and take on board those very important topics to be discussed with many of our partners. And the partnership we have started in this webinar, or we are experiencing here with key institutions working in this area, working together to improve the knowledge that we have and spur the discussion that we need to have for a better use of water for food security. I think we need to make some steps ahead and formalize them so that we can be active not only or punctually like this today, but have a sustainable collaboration which can use our different audiences to improve the knowledge, the adoption, and the use of existing tools. I can't, I will take just 1 minute if you allow, Kitch. I want to, not to repeat, but to emphasize what Abebe has said on the need for Africa to prioritize where they want to put emphasis, where they want to invest money to have a sustainable growth of our economies and through food security. And capacity building is one of them. And the right investment, which would be sustained to really improve agricultural activities, both for small and large size farmers. And these will take many angles. And what I want to emphasize now is the need for advocacy to bring on board the ministers of finance, but to discuss, to promote that discussion with their colleague of agriculture and water. And we are planning also to put this question of water and its indispensable character, both for agriculture, energy, environment, and other areas of sustainable development to the table of the head of state and government, so that we can create that knowledge and also that interests, and hopefully have the decision to push forward this agenda of best use of our water resources for a sustainable development of the African continent. I thank you, Kitch.
Thank you very much, yes, for your response. And now we have a question from Sibiri Julian Yamiogo to Dr. Agnes Kalibata, and of course, Dr. Apollos Nwafo. The question is, what are the short-term and long-term measures that water stakeholders must take in terms of water security so that water effectively contributes to improving food security? Over to you, Dr. Nwafo.
Thank you. Thanks, Kitch, for the question. I think, first of all, in the short term, we need to consider the fact that, there are already existing policies and frameworks that support regional integration as far as we're concerned in the continent. And if we look at, some of these frameworks within the regional economic communities that have been, agreed to by member states, in the short term, we can begin to build on that by implementing. And how do we move to implementation? One is to domesticate some of these agreements within national legislatures. So we need to, support our governments to begin to look at domesticating some of these agreements, and then they become acts of parliament that are passed. And based on that, they can then begin to find their way to national planning and budgets, because you need to understand that, governments don't just make investments. They look at budgets are actually policy priorities expressed in figures. So if you look at it that way, then it means that, a policy will not be financed if it's not domesticated, and that way, that begins our pathway to regional integration, whereby member states can, domesticate what they've signed up to. And, if you look at what Africa has done, in line with the 2063 agenda and Africa's 2025 water vision, you'll see that the Dar es Salaam Plan of Action, which sort of reflects the Ngor Declaration of 2015, provides an opportunity for us to look at short-term measures.
Okay, I've looked at it. No bother.
At short-term measures.
Kindly mute so we can continue. Sorry, Apollos, please continue.
Thank you. So that helps us to then look at short-term measures, and then we can begin to think about that in a way such that our governments can swiftly move into implementation because they've all been agreed to, and that will support regional integration. The second is around the fact that we probably need to look at the fact that we can consider what I would like to refer to as low-hanging fruits, as far as regional integration or regional water security is concerned. So for example, what governments are doing with the Chad water basin is laudable. We know that the Chad water basin has the Lake Chad has reduced to 1/8 of its original size today, and governments are now taking very clear measures, to avoid a food crisis, and a water crisis within the catchment areas of the countries that are involved, in managing the Lake Chad. So those are short-term measures that we need to take forward and keep to those agreements. On the longer-term measures, we need to consider strategic approach. And as we look at regional water security, we need to look at it in the light of, food security. We need to look at it in the light of livelihoods. We need to look at it in the cost of human lives. So we need to develop long-term strategies that can be taken forward, in such a way that every country is able to take responsibility. There are clear contributions from member states, in the region, and then we consider an approach that brings stakeholders together. So let me use an example. So if you look at, if you look at the Nile River Basin Authority, or if you look at, the Manu River Union, which is another example, which has its secretariat sitting in Freetown, you see that as much as there's been very clear, laudable agreements, the challenge has been a long-term strategy and putting in the right financing mechanisms, to support some of these plans. So if we want to consider regional water security in the longer term, a longer term measure is to have the right strategy first that governments will sign off to. But secondly, is to ensure that there's a very clear regional investment plan, which is managed by the region and supported by member states of that region or that basin authority, that regional basin authority, to ensure that, that as we look at water security in the longer term, we are financing related sectors that support regional water security. So from the smallholder farmers to access to food, to ensure that, we are investing in capacity at both at the technical and strategic level to ensure management of those strategies and delivery, as well as making sure that we have clear, measured results framework, that we can use to measure progress as we go forward, and that it's giving the right political backing. So for example, we know that the Africa Water Vision for 2025 is discussed at the highest level at the heads of states. I remember, a few years ago, I used to be part of the team that used to develop the report for the heads of states. So that level of political backing is required if those long-term strategies are to be implemented, and we are going to achieve regional water security in the long run. Back to you, Kitch.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nwafo. High-level political will is needed to address these issues. And I'd like to quickly take a comment from Ogechukwu. He wanted to know the share of Africa's irrigated area that is irrigated using groundwater, and that he lost connection when the right answer was given. The correct answer that we gave was 13%. Thank you very much. And on that note, I'll move to the next question, which is directed to Professor Tijani from Sahid Ishak Olatunji. What is Ankar doing in relation to having an impact on the water bill being sent by the Nigerian Federal Ministry of Water and Environment? Thank you. A straight answer, Professor Tijani, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kitch. The question is somehow, I'll look at it from this angle. Let's look at it that water itself is life, and it's really always a contentious issue when it comes to legislation. It's a very serious contentious issue when it comes to legislation, either nationally or transboundary wise. So, and that is why the legislation is always contentious when it comes to regulation of the water, which the bill is trying to address in Nigeria. But be as it may, I know this bill has gone through series of stakeholders at the drafting stage. even at the point when it goes to the assemblies for deliberation. And I know many professional bodies in Nigeria contributed to this bill. Of course, there's always one way or the other some areas of contention where you have legislation like this. But the bottom line is, some of us in Nigeria, as a Nigerian, I'm talking now as a Nigerian, as a professional hydrogeologist in Nigeria, and at the professional level in Nigeria, we have been looking at the bill that, look, the bill may have some reservations in some areas that the public are not, that are criticizing, but we cannot throw the baby and the bathwater away. That there are some aspects that we really need to regulate water use and water management in Nigeria. And that bill is addressing that. So the contentious areas in terms of which section of the land belong to who and who is going to control the water on that land, that boils down to the issue of right to land and right to water. And that is why the focus, the takeaway from one of our key presenters today is that this thing has to be looked into holistically. The Ministry of Water Resources, the Ministry of Land, and then the land tenure system has to be considered, and so on, so that those kind of contentious area can be harmonized, because the right to water should be a guarantee. Also, the right to land is also should be guaranteed. I think those are the areas that is contentious. But from the AMCO side, AMCO as a continental organization, we are not going to directly, we are just more or less like an advocacy trying to advise each government. Each government have its own internal procedures to promulgate this thing. But at a particular level in AMCO, especially relating to groundwater, the upper group that I presented, we have a policy strengthening system that we are discussing on, and we have a thematic area where we are looking at the various water policies in different African countries, identify areas of gaps and possibly areas of harmonization. Even if we do that at AMCO level, it is advisory. We can only give a guideline and advise each country based on science and fact. And that is
Thank you very much, Prof.
And
Thank
we
you
expect
very much,
that
Prof.
they will accept that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And we will take the last question, but ladies and gentlemen, participants, distinguished panelists, we assure you that when we're sharing the recording of the webinar, we will attempt to address some of the questions that have not been answered, and there are a lot of them. The last question is from the immediate past Executive Secretary of AMCAO, Mr. Baimastal, and he said, COVID-19 has made it impossible to achieve the SDGs, in particular SDG 6. Should 2030 be maintained as the target year, or should we be realistic in moving the target year beyond 2030? I'd like one sentence from each of our panelists to address, to respond to this. I'll start with Dr. Abebe.
Thank you so much. Very interesting discussion. This question is very is very interesting. And in Africa, we are not new to shifting goals. And this is not a good way of making progress. Let me remind you that in 2014, the heads of states and government of the African Union met in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, and adopted what we call Malabo Declaration on Agriculture. And they set a goal towards ending hunger from Africa by the year 2025, and offered to hold themselves mutually accountable through a biennial review process. The same goal, SDG 2, talks about ending hunger and malnutrition, but 5 years later, 2030, all the information, the data, evidences indicate that most of African countries are not on track towards meeting these goals. The 2030 goal I'm talking about, let alone the 2025. So what is the solution? defining another goal, postponing the year? Is it going to solve the problem? I don't think so. I think the solution is taking action, bold action. However far we can set the goal, if we're not doing our job properly and timely, it's not going to work. So the solution is not in shifting the goal. The solution is in taking proper actions, in increasing investment in the priority areas that are defined by the national systems. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. I hand over to Apollos Nwafo. Just one sentence, because we're about to close. Dr. Apollos, should we move it back, or should we stick to 2030?
I think progress so far, I think we need to be honest with ourselves. Progress so far leaves much to be desired. And part of that challenge is because, they are shifting context. The context has become very fluid, and worrying. And so I think it's about how we are able to build resilience and promote innovative approaches and methodologies, and include particularly technologies, if we're going to wake up by 2030 and see that Africa is not water scarce and still facing challenges with food insecurity globally. So those are the two things. It's around resilience and technologies, innovative approaches that we can take forward. Over to you, Kitch.
Thank you very much, Apollos. Dr. Ringler, what is your take on the 2030 deadline?
Yeah, I think everything has already been said. Yeah, clearly, we need action now and not changing the end dates. Those are aspirational goals, but if we don't have aspirations, no action will be taken. I think as a result of climate change, rapidly growing population growth in Africa, there will, governments' hands will be forced to take more action. But the problem is, if hands are being forced and there's no proactive investment, that means we will have a lot more food insecurity. We will have a lot more people without access to water for basic hand washing and for productive uses. So the future does not look very good. And so we have to even more actively make it clear what the costs are of inaction, and that those are, some of these impacts we're currently seeing, and they're growing unless we change course very quickly. So, we have to, I think, raise the alarm bell and be much more forceful on the negative impacts of not doing things, which is the course of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claudia Ringler. We need to accelerate action. Over to you, Professor Tijani. Before
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I think not to risk the chance of repeating other people, my own take is that we need political will, and political will backed with financial commitment to invest. And for us to also realize the fact that if we can tackle water security, we can tackle food security through the water security, that will take care of the energy security, and it will take care of a lot of other SDG goals. So in that case, not the need to change the date, rather the need for political will, and political will backed with financial commitment. Of course,
thank you very much.
We can do it alone as Africa, whether there is need for collaboration and synergy with the developed world. That is left an open question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Moshood. We need to strengthen political will. And on that note, I will hand over to the ES to weigh in on what we need to do to accelerate action towards SDG deadline 2030, whether to shift it or not.
I will start where you have just ended. I think we don't need to shift it. We need rather to search into ourselves how to reach it. Dr. Kalibata, represented here by Dr. Apollos, Dr. Abebe, Dr. Ringler, Professor Moshood, I wish to thank you very much for sharing this knowledge to the participant that we had here, and sitting to respond to their questions so that we can have try to have the same understanding of what is required for African continent to move ahead in all the beautiful plans and goals that we have given ourselves, but on most of which we are lagging behind. I thank you very much for this, and pray that this type of discussion does not stop. At AMCA, we will continue to be creating platform like this so that we can continue to share. So next time when we call upon you, please come and again continue to do this. It is part of the capacity building that we have talked about. And we need absolutely to improve our knowledge and translate that knowledge into the right level of technology uptake and use, so that we can be able to increase our productivity, to make it affordable, and increase the income, reduce poverty, and move to more sustainable development and socioeconomic development. Absolutely, I think capacity building is key because I think for us, Africans, we have a key problem on that. Sometimes we sit and talk of money, but even if we got billions, if we don't have the right skills, knowledge, and the willingness to translate them into the impact that we need, we may still fail. So capacity is one of those things. Policy is absolutely necessary. We need the right environmental, enabling environment, so that we can be able not only to adopt technologies, but also to use the resources that we have in a proper way, and benefit in a more optimal way of the partnership that we have with different countries that need the resources we have in Africa for their development, but also that should not be only for the development of the partners, but also for the development of African continent. We need to build win-win cooperation and partnership on these resources, including agricultural resources and use of water for production of what the world needs for attaining the food security, for that matter. I want to come back to other thing. We know that in Africa we have many malnourished people. We know that we still have hunger. We know that the I was lost, my connection went off. Okay.
Welcome back, ES. I think we're very apologetic participants. The ES will continue where he stopped. We had a power outage, but we'll continue now on roundup. Thank you for your patience.
I'm very sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm very sorry. I will shorten what I wanted to say. I was saying that 1/3 of the population is malnourished, and yet, and the productivity is low. Yet we know that if we use irrigation, we can increase productivity, production, income, and be able to diversify our food basket and improve our malnutrition. So it is a policy direction that is needed here so that we, excuse me?
Please go on, yes.
I think it is a political, a policy direction that we need to deliberately increase the use of water in agriculture to improve food production. And we need also to talk of the current situation that we are in, because COVID-19 for sure reduced and impacted many areas of our economies, and including agriculture. And we need to prepare our continent to be more resilient to this type of pandemic and very important epidemics, which will happen for sure in the future. And AMCAO has been sharing knowledge and coordinating effort at the highest level with the ministers in charge of water and sanitation, so that we can exchange information, promote peer-to-peer learning, and also provide through the Calabash, our newsletter, the information related to all this. And so that we can together develop a plan for resilience of the continent to this type of pandemic. We will continue that and link it to other different uses, make it a comprehensive plan, because this pandemic, they can indeed jeopardize areas as far as even agriculture and food production. I want to conclude by saying that Africa is not on track to reach its own fixed goal in food production and use of water for this objective. Africa has not reached its own goal on access to safe water for all and to achieve water security for different users. And we need to be mindful that water security is key for food security, and both are key for peace and security, which is one of the factors necessary to work for sustainable development. So we need absolutely to work and not leave it to only one sector. It is not a business for only ministers of water, but it is a responsibility of policy and decision makers, and us at different levels, CSOs, NGOs, development partners, individual at the community level, we have a role to play, and I'm calling every one of us to action so that together we can transform the continent of Africa by a better use of water resources and the soil and the human beings, human force that we have, including the youth that we have. We need to empower the youth so that they can contribute to building the continent they need us to live them in the few years to come. I thank you again for all of you, for your keen participation, for your questions, for your comment. And I want to end by thanking my elder, the former executive secretary of AMCAO, Mr. Bai Mastal, for getting time to participate to this webinar and to share he's concerned by the questions that he asked and also his guidance with the comment that he wrote in the chat. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ES, for your closing remarks. And I want to use this opportunity as we round up to thank you, Dr. Kalibata and Dr. Apollos Nwafo, Dr. Abebe, Dr. Ringler, and Professor Tijani for the very insightful presentations and for your very educating and enlightening responses to the questions that were asked. Thank you very much, all the participants also, for your comments and your questions. And we want to thank everyone that attended today's webinar titled, Why Water Security is Key to Ending Hunger. If you have any other questions, please contact Memuna Tal, whose email you see on the screen in the chat and in the chat box. And before we go, we have a survey on the webinar. Kindly give us your feedback on the survey. We would appreciate if you complete and provide it right away before you log out. We just shared the link of the survey in the Q&A box. You'll be receiving a follow-up email within 1 week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. And of course, responses to some of the questions that we could not address during this webinar. And ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the AMCAR Secretariat, our panelists and presenters, and of course you, the participants, I want to sincerely thank you for joining us today. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.